welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right, your left is...
Sebastian, the archivist.
You know what's embarrassing, Sebastian?
No?
I was in this exact same shirt last time we... This is a week later. This is where we record once a week, and I'm in the exact same shirt. But fittingly, it's a similar topic. We're on a trilogy here, a threesome of episodes about economics, philosophies, political philosophies. What would you call it?
Political philosophies.
Political philosophies. We've done communism. We just did fascism. And for whatever reason, communism got a fine reception. Fascism got like a lot of comments. And I love comments. The comments definitely did not watch our hour-long episode. Maybe one of them did. Most of them are like pro-fascism, I guess, which is odd. I wasn't expecting that. But I guess we did say that it's kind of growing in popularity again because it was so maligned in it wasn't well represented in the way it was been attacked for years now, and so people are like unprepared for real fascism, and so when they hear about it, they're like, oh, that's intriguing. And it's kind of growing in the Christian scene. So a lot of comments saying, yes, you can be Christian and fascist. Our whole point was that, I mean, I guess you can call yourself whatever you want. Can a human be a butterfly? Well, no, but you could meet somebody that's crazy that says that they are a butterfly, and like, okay, there's somebody who's claiming to be a butterfly, but are they actually a butterfly? And so no, we would say you cannot be consistently a Christian and a fascist. We had a commenter say that this is essentially the no true Scotsman fallacy, in that we're holding the standard of being a Christian or the standard of being a fascist so high that no real person is actually a Christian or a fascist in our explanations, and therefore, like, nobody's a Christian or a fascist. So of course you can't be a Christian fascist because nobody's either. We would contest that. I would contest that and say that we know that we are imperfect Christians, and we hold a lot of Christians that there's a lot of people we would consider Christians who we would say are reasonably consistent, even if they aren't perfectly Christian. And in the same way, a reasonably consistent fascist is somebody who at least adheres to like some of the basic doctrines, of which Sebastian was diligent in pulling out the sources.
Yes, from Gentile himself, Giovanni Gentile.
And so it's not that we're like demanding full allegiance to fascism, otherwise you can't consider yourself a fascist, or full allegiance to the Bible in the way we understand it, lest you not be considered a Christian. It's just some, at least some of this, right? And no, I would say definitively by the core of what fascism was claiming to be, and that is the state is God, or God is God, these two things are not compatible. So you may call yourself a fascist, but if you're not really like you don't actually believe the state is God, then why are you calling yourself a fascist? Because you like Hugo Boss or like black hats? Well, then not really fascist. Or in the same way, if you think the state is God, but you like the incense of the Roman Catholic Church or something, are you really Christian? Or are you just like taking a random aspect of it? So I don't think that's no true Scotsman at all. It's just take at least the core of the doctrine and not the periphery.
Yep, and those cores clash. They definitely clash.
So we've done communism, we've done fascism. There's one last big one to talk about. Sebastian, what is it?
It is capitalism. Correction, before more people get triggered. We talked about Marxism, which can be expressed as communism in our first episode in this series. Doesn't have to be for all the people that might get offended by this. Disclaimer. So now we are going to do capitalism, which is one that is either very loved or very hated these days in the United States.
Now, I guess so the headline question is, can you be a Christian and a capitalist?
Can you be before our dear commenters get upset, can you be a consistent Christian that seeks to honor God, his precepts, the teachings of Jesus Christ, the best of your ability, and be someone that honors the teachings and precepts of capitalism, whether espoused, for example, by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, or give, the adjacent, a defined form of capitalism, like what Adam Smith proposed. Yes.
Now, we are living in the United States, which is generally considered to be a capitalist nation. So take that into account on our biases and whatever else. But we're going to try to take this from as objective a standpoint as possible by going to some of the original sources and talking about trying to talk about it in a neutral way before we get into the scripture. Now, we will get into scripture and we will give our opinions. So this is not going to be an unbiased. We are advocating for truth here. But we want to do it in a way that is consistent with you being a Christian. So if you're not a Christian, I guess I don't really care what you have to say whether or not a Christian can be a capitalist. But if you are a Christian, we have a ton of Bible context pulled up to talk about it. So we want to use the Bible to inform our political beliefs and not the other way around. We don't want our political beliefs to inform the Bible, especially... I think that's especially dangerous in a nation that is the thing that you are talking about. So in this case, we're in the United States, which is generally a capitalist nation. And so that's especially dangerous to conflate or push your political beliefs onto the Bible. So we want to be especially cautious of that with capitalism versus fascism and communism. There's less of a threat of that because the nation is not, we're not like inculcated in those things. All right.
I might even contend, is the U.S. really capitalist based on the definitions that we're going to hear from Adam Smith?
Well, to our commenter who was talking about the no true Scotsman fallacy, is any nation truly, fully capitalist? Well, no. So, spoiler alert, no. Yes. But that's just because the world is messy. I would say generally the U.S. is. For all its faults, generally the U.S. is capitalist. But let's define it. What is capitalism? Where does it come from? Sure. What is it about?
Let's do it. Okay, context. Before capitalism, in this year is 1776, when Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations. Before this, what was the largest, the most popular economic system? Mercantilism. Something that's making a comeback these days, which probably shouldn't, but hey, we'll talk about that later. Feudalism and mercantilism. Feudalism died when the Black Death hit Europe, and so many people were destroyed, ravaged. Cities where people died, cities were ravaged by the Black Death. And that led to the rise of the merchant, the middle class, and competing with aristocrats. In the age of colonialism, people are going across the oceans, establishing colonies, and there is this growing positive view on trade. Back in the Middle Ages, trade was seen as an icky thing because aristocrats don't trade. You live off the land. You grow food. That's how you produce things. Keep that in mind. Okay. In this mercantilist system that's developed through the age of colonialism, it is a system that wants to maximize export and limit import. You want to maximize everything that goes out. You want to limit the amount of stuff that goes in. We're talking about countries here. And you want to maximize the internal resources that a nation has. That's why they went on conquering all those territories, because you want to have as many resources as possible. Because resources, according to mercantilism, are finite. We'll go over that in a little bit, if that's true. It was a zero-sum game. So nations thought that if a country benefits from trade, another one is going to suffer. That's the world that mercantilism lives in. It's a zero-sum game. And what they're going on about is obtaining as much gold, specifically for coins, you can imagine wealth, resources, and land. That's the world in which capitalism makes a different proposition. I asked the question to my class, is wealth limited or unlimited? That's the question that both systems try to answer. Mercantilism says it is limited, it's finite. Capitalism is going to contend, no. Wealth can actually be unlimited. So let's go by that. Okay. Adam Smith writes Wealth of Nations. He is driving a key idea that people function based on incentives, which means people will act on their own self-interest, taking the path of least resistance. That is the background. Remember the theme in communism that it's struggle, class struggle is the underlying, whether you can say human nature, driving force behind history. Fascism was survival of the fittest, pretty much. Strength, unity, competition with others. Okay. With this, behind the Wealth of Nations, my humble opinion, and of others, is that people function based on incentives. Incentives can be good or bad, but people function on incentives. Okay. Some key ideas, and then we'll talk about how this applies to the way the economy functions as a nation, and if such a system agrees with God's law or contradicts it. We'll say that for later. Okie dokie. He developed the idea of production, which means transforming inputs, labor, resources, and capital, into finished goods. this creates value. This was so much different than what was considered of having finished good back in the day. Because back in the day, you only had land, therefore only crops are things that you produce. That's produce. That you actually produce plants and fruits to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas he is contending, you can actually think of this as production being finished items. It doesn't have to necessarily be something you grow out of the ground. That was revolutionary for the time. Did he invent these things? Michael would contend probably not, but he is the one who put it all in one nice book for everyone to read.
He's the most influential writer on the subject,
Yes.
is what I would say, yes.
Yeah. So capitalism changed the view of production being turning raw goods into a finished product. Cotton turning to clothes. All right. Capital. What's capital? An item that can contribute value that is not land or labor. And it's not just money. So he further continues, and I'm just flying through the wealth of nations, the division of labor. This was critical because back in the Middle Ages, what do you have? Guilds, which is what corporatism advocates for, in which one guy, a blacksmith, could make both swords, nails, gets the mines, not always, but he could go mine the goods out of the ground and then transform it into a finished product. That is inefficient, capitalism argues, because you can assign different roles of production to different people to maximize the efficiency, the speed, and the output ultimately. This was revolutionary for the time, because again, for thousands of years, people have lived in a world in which one guy in a guild, in this case, does everything from extracting the mineral from the ground to turning it into a sword, to nowadays into a machine. You divide labor. Okay.
You specialize labor.
Oh, you're reading my notes. This leads to specialization.
Mm-hmm.
So you have people focusing on specific tasks, and they either just continue that for the rest of their lives and ideally become really good at it. Okay, another key idea, trade. The exchange of goods, that's what it means. Free trade. For society to thrive, trade must be free, which means that goods should be exchanged without tariffs, restrictions, or quotas from the government. You can imagine that's not always going on in the age of colonialism. The governments definitely put tariffs to prevent other goods from coming in. So that's why I raised the question that is the US truly capitalist when you're restricting free trade? Let's not go over that right now. So nations should make and export what they're really good at. They should not try to make everything all at once because it's inefficient. And it can be waste of resources and time. So here's the thing. Another idea behind this, that trade can be a win-win for both parties. If both parties agree, there's no stealing, there's no subterfuge involved, it's a win-win. And this is your favorite part, the invisible hand of the market, which some might call providence. I think he refers to it as providence in his book on morality. So what is this? That producers and consumers acting in self-interest to get profit or the best value of a deal leads to better economic outcomes. So even people that have different agendas, in order to get money, profit, in this case, or the best good, that leads to a better outcome for everybody, Adam Smith would argue. There's the idea of supply and demand that's involved in the invisible hand of the market. And prices vary based on the amount of something that exists compared to how much people want to buy it, want to acquire it. You didn't have this in mercantilism. This is why it sounds, yes, this is all obvious, Sebastian. Why are you boring with me? This was revolutionary for the time. Because who set the prices during the age of colonialism? Spain. Portugal. So you can only buy this good for this amount of money. We're not going to let that Portuguese garbage come into our country. Okay, no free trade. We set the value of goods. So.
Well, and if I can interrupt, I think a lot of what Adam Smith had to say was like, we already knew this. As much as you're saying it's revolutionary, it's not that revolutionary to say that you produce things. Everybody knows you produce things. Roman Empire was producing things. China was producing things that weren't food. The advocacy, because Adam Smith is writing to the rulers of Scotland and ultimately of Great Britain. He's advocating that they don't tariff goods. He's advocating that they don't intervene in the market. And he's saying you can still get the outcomes from society that you desire if you don't force people to do it. And here's why. And he's advocating that they don't intervene because it's actually counterproductive. When they set quotas for how much they should be importing or exporting, they're actually hurting the wealth of their nation, hence why he wrote Wealth of Nations. And so does he call this capitalism, for the record? He does not. He talks about capital, but nobody would call this capitalism until Karl Marx called it capitalism. So it kind of, we use Marxist terminology when we say capitalism. But I think that the truly interesting thing that Adam Smith does talk about here, like the rest of it is not that interesting, it's not that revolutionary. Even division of labor, I think textbooks like to talk on this because it's understandable, but it wasn't Adam Smith's idea. The invisible hand of the market and or providence, I think, is unique to Adam Smith because it recognizes, and I believe rightfully so, it recognizes the role of God in the economy. And everybody from feudal age and forever has recognized the role of God in whether or not fields produce good harvests or bad harvests. Everybody recognizes that's from God. Well, in the same way, whether or not nations are producing lots of nails or a little bit of nails, some production method, is also providenced by God. And what Adam Smith was arguing was that if you don't intervene in the market, God's hand will guide the market to efficiencies, i.e., if you don't intervene in trade, when a Portuguese trader comes bearing wine or something to sell to your people on the shores, you might be afraid that your unknowing, sad merchants that are at the port will pay too much for the wine, and they'll give valuable English goods to the Portuguese guy, and we'll get the wrong end of the deal. We'll get some worthless wine, and they'll get some valuable gold or something. But, Adam Smith argues, across enough people working, God is at work because we're made in the image of God, and God is the one directing the hand of nations, and God will actually give people the wisdom to not overpay for wine, or in fact pay just the right amount. A price that nobody would be able to discern the wine is worth, people will end up agreeing on is the worth of the wine, and they will be very accurate as to the exact worth the wine was to them or to the nation of England, even when they aren't trying. And that's, I think, like the best thing out of the Wealth of Nations is not a lot of the things that like you'll read about in your textbook or whatever. It's purely the invisible hand of the market is the most convincing or most compelling thing about the Wealth of Nations to me, is the recognition of God's hand in the market and not intervening in disrupting God's rewarding of the righteous and of good production and punishing of bad production and the unrighteous.
Yeah, just from my notes, except much nicer. The people are the ones who decide what is produced, not the state.
Which is scary because, like, if you're a king, you recognize that the people are unrighteous and they're not smart. They're not always educated, or at least not as educated as you. And so you think, for the betterment of the people, I'm going to set, like, you need to be making pots and pans now because we need some of those. And like, there's a great market opportunity. So you're going to command and control. Okay, everybody that works with metal, you're going to go make pots and pans, and we're going to make sure that we import enough iron for that and make sure we don't pay too much for it. So here's the exact price we're going to set to pay for iron that we're going to make for pans and nails. And frankly, you don't know. You're just a man. Let God determine the prices for things. Let people be free to do it. And that's the magical thing, the discovery. I would say capitalism, whatever we call this, we can call it capitalism. Capitalism was discovered rather than invented. Like, Adam Smith discovered that God's hand does work in markets, that prices do balance themselves out to reasonable rates if you just leave them alone. That's really a discovery. It's like a scientific discovery of the law of gravity. This is the law of markets. And so he didn't have to invent anything. He just discovered the way God is operating in markets.
Nice.
Now, I guess it begs the question, like, is it a true discovery? Karl Marx makes claims that the arc of history is like bending towards communism, so inevitably the class struggle will result in the lower class, or the biggest class, being the dominators of society. So it's like, do it well. And fascism claims that the arc of history is bending towards like utter domination, survival of the fittest, I guess.
Survival of the fittest, sure.
And so we have to unify. Like, it also assumes that unity is the best way to being the strongest, fittest nation. So we have to prove these things out. But that's the claim of capitalism to me, is that that economies run best when you leave it to God instead of men. So, and that leaving them to God means like leaving them alone. Like, I guess counterintuitively, giving them into the hands of many men is actually the way of giving it into the hands of God, as opposed to centralizing it into the hands of one man. Like the more singular you get in command, the worse and farther away from God's will you get in economics. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good. And then my take from this, moving away from his arguments, because he doesn't propose a form of government, is that when you decentralize the purchasing power away from the state to the people, that's a very democratic way of thinking. So it's just my assumption, comment down below if you agree or not, that this way of thinking, while it can exist in a monarchy, because he didn't necessarily say, oh yes, we need to be monarchies, we need to be republics. It thrives in republics. If you're already operating this way in the market, it might lead to your politics being also more democratic than an absolute monarchy. Meaning, decrease the power of the state so that the state is not tempted to increase taxes and tariffs, and also protect private property, because monarchies were famous for implementing taxes randomly. English Civil War, case in point, and also seizing private property. So when ultimately, as you said, Mike, the argument is that the less that an authority is involved in the economics of a nation, the better that would be. Because through God's will, providence, people make decisions that lead to better outcomes for the nation as a whole. Since they're even if they're acting in their own self-interest.
Now, to give it a similar treatment as communism and fascism, what do you think is like the overall nirvana of capitalism? Is there such a thing? Like, how does it differ, I guess, from communism and fascism?
Well, the libertarians will be all over this. Nation in which the state is barely existent, free trade is everywhere, everything is deregulated, and this is strictly speaking capitalist means, and everything is up for the market to decide, which would include things like prostitution, things like drugs, and I don't mean just regular drugs like alcohol, I mean opium or cocaine. No regulation whatsoever for any of these things.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of the nirvana. Adam Smith doesn't really propose it, but those who carry forward like an infatuation with the hand of providence, they propose ideas. I think there's like different words for it, and so I was trying to remember the exact words. But in any case, it's a capitalist utopia, usually called like anarcho-capitalism or some form of it, where there's really no government at all, and that so there's nobody to oppress you. And instead, because everybody is, whether they're trying to act rationally or not, the market, the invisible hand, God, is forcing them or incentivizing them to act rationally. And so like everybody you interact with in life, whether it's your local tailor or your wife or your children or the guy down the street or like anybody you interact with in society, is acting perfectly rationally because they're perfectly influenced by essentially the hand of God to do what's most efficient. And so that's the capitalist utopia, is basically everybody is a king, a perfectly well-mannered, fair king, and kind of any complaint you can lob at a libertarian that believes in this kind of eventual utopia, where you say, well, what about like things we would all agree that people want but will hurt society, like pollution, prostitution, murder, all these things. They would say that one, the state, like in the interim, kind of like the socialism to communism, just like communism says, in the interim, before we can get to perfect communism, we have to have socialism, some concessions. They would say some concessions right now are that the state should punish externalities that people do and it hurts the market, like pollution or like societal wrongs like prostitution or things that make people less productive and like it's just not a good thing to have around. However, like in the end, when we finally reach full capitalism, true capitalism, uh, people who do promote bad things, bad moral things, those bad moral things also result in worse lives and like less success. And so if you are a micro nation of like you and your neighborhood or whatever that promotes prostitution, well, the women in your area are going to be less productive and the men are going to be less, like they're going to be doing these less productive things, and therefore your neighborhood, your commune, whatever it is, your capitalist commune, will not be as successful as the ones neighboring you, and eventually your way of thinking will you'll either change or like people will buy you out or like you're otherwise stop existing. And so the hope is that essentially the hand of God will erase the wicked and promote the righteous throughout all of society, which well, I guess we should leave our conclusions for later, but like in some ways I think is right, and in some ways I think is wrong. So I don't think that nirvana is achieved by capitalism alone.
A special ingredient is needed.
Yes, lots of, well, I'd say several.
Yeah.
What to me, and I don't know, maybe you can batten up this, to me capitalism, Adam Smith's philosophy, is different than communism and fascism and whatever else, because it's really limited. It's really just a specific policy prescription, and that is like don't mess with the market. It's not like, yes, there are people who think that the invisible hand of the market will eventually create a societal utopia, but that's not a requirement or like a driving thing. And so the policy remains the same. Don't mess with anything. Like even the people who say that eventually it will result in utopia, they're not advocating for like policies that will get us there, except for don't mess with the market. And so it's not a very wide philosophy. It doesn't speak into societal rights or wrongs beyond don't mess with the market. Some people would say it should include what's called the non-aggression principle or the non-harm principle. There's other words for it. But first of all, it's not what Adam Smith proposed. But two, I guess we can rope that into if we want, of the like, don't mess with the market and don't harm other people. Okay. I think when you open it up like that, it begs a lot of questions. And that's why I'm not really going to rope it in here to the capitalist conversation, because the non-aggression principle, what does aggression mean? Like clearly, like if you punch somebody in the face, that's probably aggression, except if that person wanted it, or they asked for it, or you're being paid, and like you're in a fight or something, right? A paid UFC fight, then there's an exception. Or is polluting your neighbor's river, is that harming them? Because you didn't directly harm them. They chose to drink from the river. Don't you have the right to do on your property what you want? Well, okay. If that is harm, then is like not educating your children harming them, and therefore like should we have laws to require the education of your children? You can see how this starts to expand to basically anything that sounds bad is harm, ergo don't allow it, and you end up in a regular old government that makes lots of rules. And so I don't like adding that one in. We're talking purely capitalism, so I digress. It's pretty limited. And so it's not nearly as like all-encompassing as fascism or communism. It doesn't have the same moralities. It's really just an economic prescription. And if you do add those other things in, if you add the non-aggression principle in, I think you have a big question of like, what do you? There's going to have to be some lots of clarification around what non-aggression means. Yeah.
Indeed.
Is there any other transition we want before we get into the Bible? Because that seems like that's the next thing to talk about.
Yeah, I was trying to find, and I should have written it down, a quote from Adam Smith, because he did have some thoughts on morality, and of course, morality if you're a philosopher, that's going to be on your mind at some point when you think of ideas and systems. I don't think it's this one, but it is from the Adam Smith Institute. How selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others, and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. Yeah, that's not it. On the theory of moral sentiments, because he also wrote on morality. I would say that he lived in a world that was deeply influenced by Christianity. Scotland, 1700s.
Yes.
Very Presbyterian. or at least try to be. So that was something that was in the back of his mind. So I'm trying to give him points because Giovanni Gentile has his own proposal of what morality should be, and also Karl Marx had his own thoughts on morality, specifically religion. Destroy it, and we need to build it anew. And Gentile's religion, it's a nice tool for the government to have. Morality, it's good for the government to use as well.
Mm-hmm.
That is a view on morality. Whereas Adam Smith assumed that there was a pre-existing moral compass and then developed this idea with that.
Because he was just prescribing a suggestion, a policy to the government. He wasn't like an all-encompassing philosophy.
Yeah.
And in the same way, like unlike Karl Marx and Gentile or other fascist leaders, Adam Smith isn't really like a big character that we idolize. In fact, I don't know that he was really a Christian. He was in the time of like Scottish Renaissance, which is when people were being queer in the, I guess, truest sense of the word, being strange, like intentionally strange. And so he was intentionally strange, intellectual, deist kind of guy, just like some of the founding fathers in the United States. And so I don't idolize him one bit. I think that he discovered something, just like Neil Bohr is like a straight atheist, right? But Neil Bohr, I think he is. Maybe I should know my scientists better. But the guy who discovered the atom, or like identified the model for the atom, the little bits of the universe, he can discover something great. Like I think the discovery of the atom and the way the elements function is incredible. You don't need to be a Christian or an honorable man to do that. But I appreciate it. So in the same way, like I think Adam Smith discovered this way that God works, and I appreciate that, but I don't have to like respect him otherwise as a man, or like listen to his other thoughts on morality. I think his thoughts on morality are not great, frankly. And I don't think, and some would say otherwise, I don't think that capitalism or this system, the invisible hand of the market, requires a moral people. It doesn't. So he may be assuming, I mean, he's assuming Scotland when he prescribes these things to the king. And so, yeah, I mean, he is presuming a relatively moral people with a system of code, like code of law. But capitalism doesn't need that. It benefits from it because that's good too. Anyways, to me, capitalism, like if we bring it to the Christian lens, capitalism is just a part of the law. Like if we have a big circle is all of God's law, and capitalism is part of God's law, and it fits into it. It's not the whole of God's law. And so I would never say that the only thing I would prescribe to a nation is capitalism. It's like only part of the piece. It's only prescribing Article 3 of the Constitution, if you're really big into the Constitution, which I'm not, but it's like only a part of the Constitution. You can do that, and like you might benefit from Article 3 of the Constitution, but you'd really benefit if you had Article 1, 2, and 4, and 5, and etc. So that's how I would treat capitalism. So I'm not offended by it. I wouldn't call myself a capitalist because I'm a theonomist. I believe in God's law and the application of God's law over and above capitalism. However, I think capitalism is in line with God's law. Is my spoiler to our conversation today.
That's the contention that you would argue for. That I think we have pointed out that Marxism clashes directly with God's law. Mainly the stealing part, in which Marx advocates for ceasing the means of production. That's stealing.
And that you don't have the right to your stuff. So not only that people are entitled or should be stealing it, but that it's actually bad that you have it.
Private property, specifically. Yeah. Okay. And then with fascism, biggest red flag that in Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, the state gets the ultimate say on what morality is and what even what religion should be.
Mm-hmm.
Read the Doctrines of Fascism. I don't even have to make any more comments. Gentile makes that case himself.
I think one thing you also didn't talk about capitalism, but I'm just going to put it in here because we have some Bible quotes on it, is or again, did he really call it capitalism? No, but whatever. We're going to call it capitalism. Capitalism advocates, just like it advocates for free trade and the invisible hand of the market. It does give a caveat, and it doesn't require perfectly rational people. It doesn't require moral people. But it advocates for as much transparency in transactions as possible. And so any hidden things should be try that will make the market less efficient. For example, if you buy a vacuum cleaner and you don't know that it's broken, and the vendor of the vacuum cleaner isn't telling you it's broken, you might pay a lot for it because you want a vacuum cleaner that works. And when you buy it and it's not working, well, the transaction was not good. It didn't benefit the market. It benefited one guy and not you. And like ultimately, it hurts society that you bought a broken vacuum cleaner. And so, Smith would argue, and I think we'd all agree, that there should be as much transparency in the market as possible. It's part of the impetus behind why we have all these regulations and rules around the way stocks are traded, and the government punishes broken contracts and things like that, is because we're advocating for this transparency principle. I have an opinion though, and that is that Adam Smith is an unfortunate bearer of capitalism because he, like we said, is a deist. I think he is a convenient excuse for God haters to do righteous things because he divorces God's law from these principles by pretending he discovered it when really it was in God's law the whole time. For example, did Adam Smith discover that we shouldn't cheat each other? No. No. I mean, many people, it's not even just the Bible, many peoples have known this truth about the way God works, is that it's righteous to not deceive each other. Some religions try to change that, like Islam tries to change the deception portion, especially with unequal weights and measures. But however, here's from God's law in Deuteronomy 25. This is God's prescription for nations. He says, "Do not have two differing weights in your bag, one heavy, one light. Do not have two differing measures in your house, one large and one small. You must have accurate and honest weights and measures, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. For the Lord your God detests anyone who does these things, anyone who deals dishonestly." What are your thoughts on this, Sebastian? What does that mean?
Don't cheat people.
Tell me, like, very pedantically, what does it mean to cheat somebody?
That you are intentionally being deceptive, in this case for your own gain, and ultimately leading to the hurt of somebody else, the damage to someone else.
And in case you are not familiar with what weights and measures would be used for, if you were going to give somebody an amount of rice, grains of rice, you go to Walmart and they're going to pour out for you a pound of rice. And what this is saying is don't have one heavy and one light measure of a pound. So you might have like a weight that you're using to weigh out the rice, and you have a light weight. And so it's a little less than a pound. And so when you pour out the rice, you're actually able to get away with pouring a little less out. And the person pays the exact same amount for your pound of rice, and they go away thinking they got a pound of rice, when in fact they got 3/4 of a pound of rice. Or on the flip side, the heavyweight, if they're giving you gold and you're weighing out how much gold it is and you want a pound of gold, if you have a heavy weight, you could be getting a pound and a quarter of gold, and the weight will measure out when it's a pound and a quarter. And they think they've given you a pound of gold when really they've given you a pound and a quarter. And you know this, right? You're using your heavyweight, you're using your lightweight when it behooves you, and that's dealing dishonestly. You are intentionally lying to the other side. I think I only ask for the pedanticness because a lot of people claim to be cheated when they're not really being cheated, and whether they think they're being cheated or they're using it as like a negotiation tactic. If you're ever like in Egypt or you're like hawking things for people who negotiate, almost like the word cheated gets thrown around like very cheaply, and so they'll tell you that they're being cheated because they're asking you to pay some absurd amount for an item that isn't worth that much. But frankly, it's not really cheating somebody because you're not lying about the price. You're telling them the price up front, even if it is more than you would charge somebody else. It's not cheating somebody. Cheating somebody is lying to them, right? Oh, it's going to cost you $25, and then you charge their credit card $40. That's cheating somebody. Giving them a price without full knowledge is kind of like anti-capitalist, I guess, in a way, and that you're not like showing full price transparency. But frankly, that person is willing to pay whatever you just charge them. So I would say it's perfectly in line with God's law to charge different people different things for the same service or item, depending on how much they might value it, or maybe you're testing out how much people might value a thing. But deceiving them is another thing. Deceiving them like strictly by saying this item is $20, but it's actually $40, and you're going to charge them $40. That is a lie. I don't know your thoughts on that. I think that's when people get upset, is like, oh, you've overcharged me for something, but you agreed to pay for it, like, did I really overcharge you?
Yes. So no, that is true. So that factor is often forgotten, that you can buy this item in this Egyptian market or Peruvian market. It's your choice. And what is wrong, that's the point that you're driving home, is you tell them it's $10, and this is, or you show, or even a better example, you show them the most pristine item in your shop. Here, this is $10. And then, okay, I'll buy a deal. And then you go, I'll get you the same thing as some garbage thing falling apart, or it falls apart the moment you leave the store. That's what this law is getting at too.
Yes. I also think in maybe more like American sense, because we don't usually deal with that kind of like hawking and
haggling,
and the haggling in the United States is, I mean, sometimes you do, but like hidden fees and charges, things that credit cards and banks are always advocating to never have, because some do, and that is, oh, like this deal will earn you 3% interest on your credit card purchases, but actually, like, here's a long list of things you'll never read, and in there somewhere hidden is all these fees, and so really you're only going to be making 1.5%. When you got the card believing you would be making 3% on your purchases, and they intentionally obfuscate the fact that you will not be making 3%, you will be making 1.5%. That to me is cheating, and it's kind of hard to litigate, to sue for it in the U.S., but I would advocate that we make it easier to sue for that kind of obstruction. It's a little hard because which of the details that they gave you in the long list of the terms that you should have signed should they have left out? It's kind of a hard question, but there's no denying that huge terms and services agreements are meant to not be read. They're meant to make you go, that's way too much to read, and not read them. They are intentionally that way. And so that takes some discernment from judges on like how much is too much to really inform somebody, but it's definitely like suable if it's egregious enough of a hiding. And so I would say the U.S. is trying to adhere to this law of God, whether they know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, capitalism, the advocating for transparency in transactions, is actually really just displaying God's law, which nations have known far before Adam Smith. And in that way, it's compatible. In the same way, I'd be remiss. This is one of my favorite passages to talk about economics, because it's kind of counterintuitive to people. This is Jesus. It's called the parable of the workers in the vineyard.
Mm-hmm.
He says, well, I won't even bore you with the full thing, but he gives a parable about a man hiring workers to work in his vineyard to harvest. And he goes out to the market, hires some workers for 1 denarius, which is a day's wage, perfectly fine wage. They agree to it. They come and start working for him in the middle of the morning. He goes out again and again and again and hires different rounds of workers throughout the day, some in the afternoon, some in the evening, and some like at the very, very end of the harvest time. And all of them agree to work for a denarius. And so when they all come up to receive their wages, the first ones who were hired at the very late part of the day, who barely worked, he gives them a denarius, and they're all lined up, and he's giving everybody a denarius. And the people on the back of the line are like, well, okay, the guys up there worked like 1 hour. I worked 10 hours in the blazing hot sun. Surely he's going to like raise my rate, right? Because these guys are going to get a denarius for 1 hour of work. I should be getting 10 denariuses for 10 hours of work. And when they walk up to him, he gives them one single denarius, and they're upset. And they say a similar thing that maybe a Peruvian vendor, or, people working in these hawking streets, you've cheated me. I've been cheated. In this case, the hirer is God, in case you're unfamiliar with the parable. This is God, so he's doing a righteous thing. The hirer is doing a righteous thing. He says this, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So in this way, I think we should be careful what we think is a unequal weight and measure, because as much as there are some unequal weights and measures in America, there are also things that are perfectly righteous, and people still feel they're envious. I think one of the most common is a similar thing. If you are working for a wage and you realize the newest guy was hired and he's making double what you are, or some amount more than you get mad. You say, I've been working here for 5 years, and now this new guy who has less experience than me is making $10,000 a year or more than me. I'm being cheated. Oh, are you being cheated? Right? Because you agreed, you're happily working for this wage, maybe unhappily, but you were working for this wage, agreed to. The employer is doing nothing wrong to you by paying another person more. you might think that you deserve more. Fair enough. But the employer is not cheating you by paying you less. And I would say it's from the law of God. It's not made like super apparent in capitalism, but one of the things that helps the invisible hand of the market do its job, and i.e. the hand of God do its job, is like testing variations like that, testing different prices, testing different salaries on people, and seeing where is the optimum amount of salary. And so what you're experiencing when you are an employee for a long time and somebody's hired on and they make more than you is a market test. And it's perfectly righteous. And how you react to that market test will determine whether or not the price, the salary you've been given is right or not. If you decide to walk away and quit or find another job and the other job does pay you more, well then, yeah, they paid you too little and they lost an employee for it. And if you try to quit and you can't because nobody else is paying as much as you're being paid right now, then you were actually in the wrong, and like your employer's just being super generous to the person who came on board, but they're being perfectly generous to you. And so I think this is also in line with God's law. I don't know your thoughts here, Sebastian.
What would be cheating, so you have more definitions, is I am going to pay you $80,000 for you taking on this position, sign a deal, you're onboarded, and lo and behold, at the end of the year, you're actually getting paid $70,000 at the end of the year. That would be the definition that cheating is getting at from Scripture. Did I get that correct?
Yes. It's also a highly lucrative lawyer job, employment, suing like that. And so I assure you, anybody complaining in your life or on social media about their employer shorting them, cheating them, whatever, probably isn't being shorted or cheated, because if they really were, or maybe you can tell them, contact an employment lawyer and you can get a lot of money for that kind of thing. And employers are not keen to have that kind of suing because it will win. It's a pretty easy employment case. And so they won't be talking about it on social media because you're not supposed to talk about cases like that when you are suing. And so I once again assert that people who are claiming to have been cheated by their employer, unless their employer is like gone bankrupt or some other thing that makes them immune from suing, it's probably mistaken, or they should contact a lawyer and go sue their employer, because you can make your money doing that, because the U.S. does punish this kind of cheating. Okay, all right. Other aspects of God's law that I think we should keep in mind when talking about capitalism. Maybe you got this one.
Yeah, from Deuteronomy 15. If any of your people, Hebrew men or women, sell themselves to you and serve you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let them go for free. And when you release them, do not send them away empty-handed. Supply them liberally from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Give to them as the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today.
And I think what's important to remember about God's law is that it's definitely not afraid of giving civic punishments. It's not afraid of giving the death penalty, giving payments people have to make. It has rules in it that are enforced by the government. But it also has many laws that have no civic enforcement. We would call them the moral law. But they're no less, they're law. They're given by God. This is the way to live righteously. But the government is not given the right to enforce this law with some sort of punishment. So it is law. It's given by God. But the human government is not given the right to punish this kind of behavior. So notice on this one, there's no government punishment for not adhering to this. And you can read the whole passage if you think we're just cutting off that portion of it. There's no punishment for not doing this, but it is prescribed. And this is where I think capitalism shows itself to be just a portion of the whole of God's law, and that capitalism has nothing to say about whether or not you give slaves, like they're no longer working for you. You could argue that because this is the righteous way of living, you will ultimately benefit from it in the end. This is kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie escalation of things. So maybe you could argue it's capitalist, and okay. But I would say this is where the whole of the law of God is good to know, because this is a righteous thing and it benefits society. If you think about, maybe you want to speak to like how might this benefit society?
Sure. This is people that were reliant on you. God's principle is be generous with the gifts that you provide. In this case, the employees. Yes, are they indentured servants? That's the term we agreed to use to distinguish between chattel slavery in the U.S. and God rewards a cheerful giver. So yeah, absolutely right. There is no punishment for this. But well, actually, that's not true. Hellfire if you die and you're a scoundrel in your heart.
That's right. Yes, it is a sin against God to not do this. That's right.
Yeah. So to the example on the employer, on you feeling, not you, the individual feeling that it is unjust for the employer to give a higher salary to a new hire versus you that you've been there for years. Is he cheating on you by definition? No. What we would caution, though, is to examine your heart. We're speaking to Christians, and if you're not a Christian, get right with God. Okay. That assumed, are you being internally greedy? Are you being generous with your workers? That is something you will need to reflect on, and I think that's what this law is getting at, because there really is no punishment for this, and well, no civil punishment for this.
Mm-hmm.
So likewise, when we get some, we can apply. We talked about in other episodes how the principles from the Old Testament laws apply to modern days. Like my favorite one that I love: don't trim the edge of the fields.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a scoundrel, a greedy scoundrel, that would be the implication. You're gonna take everything from your field. You're gonna go back. Don't leave a single bit of fruit on the ground. God says no. That's not really what you should be focusing on. Do your duty, plow your field, get your produce, and whatever's left on the edges, don't go back. Let the poor people come and serve them. And we've talked about how it could be then applied to modern times. Another episode on its own, but I hope you get the point that these laws do have a principle at heart that can definitely speak to us today.
Mm-hmm. And that it goes beyond the capitalist requirements, because capitalism really just says government don't touch the markets and God will sort out the rest.
Yeah.
And it's, I would say history proves that out.
Yeah.
In that governments that don't touch their markets do well. Even unrighteous nations. I mean, every nation is unrighteous in its own way, but like even especially unrighteous nations like China, I guess if you consider the U.S. especially unrighteous, we certainly have our fair share. The economy does great when the government is not intervening. Because I would say because Adam Smith's discovery is true. Like even an imperfect implementation of capitalism is getting good. You know, it's getting better the closer to capitalism you get, whereas the closer to communism you get, the worse it's getting. And they're promising you, oh, eventually when we hit communism, full communism, real communism, it will get good. It's just going to be painful for now. But that's not how capitalism works. In the same way fascism, we're like, well, we're not fully there yet, but we're getting there, and there's going to be some pain while we kill all these people who aren't needed here. And after they're dead, then you'll see the unity we're promising. I would argue that the pain in capitalism really is pretty limited. The closer to God's law you get, capitalism you get, the better life gets. But it is not a full picture.
Let me comment on that before I forget, because you're absolutely right. The evils that you see in most, I would say in a lot of cases in the U.S., in the economies of the U.S., it is when unrighteous people try to win power through money or whatever means they can to get concessions, to influence, to get more power, weight on their side, to root out competitors, to kick out the competition, so that there's either no place for your workers to go. Now they're stuck with you. You can pay them whatever garbage you want to pay them because there's nowhere else for them to go. But if you notice, that is actually a business interfering with the freedom in the market, mercantilism, protectionism, or the government giving special subsidies to rescue failing businesses that are not good, that are incompetent, that are wicked, whatever word you may want to use. That is definitely opposed to the spirit of capitalism, if we stick to our definitions, because that's interfering with the invisible hand of the market. Many of the woes that you see in the U.S. today is from either government interference or powerful executives influencing the market to benefit themselves at the expense of others.
Yeah.
Mercantilism, protectionism.
Amen to that.
Trump
And
tariffs.
you won't see that kind of language.
Bad.
I don't think you'll see that kind of language in the Bible, but you will see like God's hand punishing the wicked and rewarding the righteous. There's a Proverbs galore about this, but I'll just read a couple. Here's from Proverbs 13. It says, "Trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children," i.e., money, inheritance is a good thing. A righteous person leaves it for his children's children, i.e., stores up a lot of wealth. But a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous, i.e., a sinner, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, whoever, they may be storing up a ton of wealth, but eventually that wealth is not going to be theirs. They're going to die. They're going to lose it. They're going to spend it all. Something is going to happen to the wealth that ends up in the hands of the righteous. Maybe not in their lifetime or ours, but like the Lord is working these things out. And so when a nation rewards unrighteousness, they're fighting against God's rules here, God's law, God's providence that he's making work in all the nations of the earth. And guess who's going to win between a nation and God? God. Now, God is not slow to act, as some people would consider him. In other Bible verses, he doesn't tarry, but he is patient. And when a nation, which represents a lot of people, including the righteous, including Christians, or at least people God is being patient with, ties itself to a failing, unrighteous business or enterprise or person, whatever it is, you can see why God might be slower to punish that business, because it will also punish the nation. And the nation includes a lot more people that he might be more patient with than just the business itself. And so when a nation unwisely decides to subsidize or protect a business that is not righteous, and really the act of doing it is probably not a righteous thing, you can see why God might be slower to destroy that business. But eventually it will die. The U.S. protected auto manufacturers for years in the United States, and it hurt us as a nation. God was clearly patient. It slowly hurt the nation through this. But when the U.S. finally detached itself from subsidizing car makers, at least majorly, the U.S. greatly benefited. And those car manufacturers greatly didn't benefit. And eventually they reformed, praise God, and righteousness was restored. And the righteous car makers, the efficient car makers, once again became leaders in the space, and the ones that were not were bought or went out of business. But that is a force of God. It's a force of providence. And this is really all Adam Smith is pointing out. And here it is in Proverbs, thousands of years before him, that a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous, and a good person leaves an inheritance for his children's children. That wealth will end up in the hands of the righteous, and wealth will leave the hands of the wicked. You see the wicked today, and they're gone tomorrow. That is the force, the inevitable, unstoppable force of God that is working in life. And so nobody can stop it. Nations can't stop it. Individuals certainly can't stop it. The Lord is going to do this. Yeah, and there's other proverbs. There's lots of economic proverbs to the record in the same string. There's an unplowed field produces food for the poor, but injustice sweeps it away. It's to the gleaning of the field proverb, I think, or law. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. May not seem connected at all, but know that like sometimes, just like with your children, businesses need to be disciplined, and they're disciplined by God, who loves the people inside of them. And so sometimes businesses hurt and have to fire people or change the way they're doing things because God loves them and is correcting a business. And I think that's what you see in businesses who are struggling and then recover, is God's discipline to these people or organizations for the sake of his name and for the sake of the people that are righteous within the organization. And then lastly, a very famous quote I've heard people talk about before: "The righteous eat to their heart's content, but the stomach of the wicked goes hungry." Or as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians, he would say that the person who does not work should not eat. Not working is unrighteous, and so don't eat.
Mm-hmm.
All very capitalist things, but again, the capitalist is really just describing God's law, is describing the force of God that is working throughout life as promised here in Scripture. And so in this way, a Christian is capitalist because he believes that God is the one that's working out these things in earth, whether it's slowly to our eyes or quickly. I believe these proverbs. I believe that trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things.
Mm-hmm. And just to address the point, that then why are there so many people suffering that are poor, whatever may be? Why are, some might say, that the rich are enjoying themselves at the expense of the poor? God's law addresses that. If there is indeed evil being done, it's because of the perversion of justice. Isaiah says that woe to the nation of unjust judges. And also in the Old Testament, God speaks to the people saying, do not favor the rich and do not favor the poor. So that is, as you were saying on that Adam Smith discovered that stealing is wrong. No, the perversion of justice has been around for a long time. So when you see that kind of wickedness with that kind of wicked people thriving, it's probably because there is some perversion of justice that's being done behind the scenes, bribery, what have you.
And this is probably, I'll be the devil's advocate
Sure.
our commenters. Michael, Sebastian, fine. The Lord is rewarding the righteous and the wicked are being destroyed. But in the meantime, like, there are wicked things that we should punish. And one of the things that Jesus, don't you love Jesus? One of the things that Jesus tells us is that it's easier for a camel to fit through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to go to heaven. The problem with people accumulating so much capital, and this is very Karl Marx would say this, that capital wealth is so enticing that institution capture, like the bribing of judges, the bribing of lawmakers to write in corrupt laws that end up hurting the whole system, is so alluring that, one, they'll always win. Like the wealthy will always beat the unwealthy via bribes. And two, so therefore, to avoid institution capture, we need to ban wealth, ban the accumulation of some amount of wealth that is well and above enough to bribe other people. So therefore, being wealthy is evil. It prevents you from going to heaven, so says Jesus. And so being wealthy is in and of itself evil. So even if the means that you've used to get there are righteous and God has rewarded you with this wealth, it's actually evil, and we should ban it because God says it prevents you from going to heaven, and it will cause bribes to, there's all these reasons that wealth would be bad, just logically. What do you have to say about that?
And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house. And they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. So he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And it concludes, and Job died an old man and full of days. If you miss this, God gave the means of production, gave private property to Job.
Right. And I think like all the basis of objection here for wealth are covered in that. One, this is from God.
Yeah.
Job also didn't like earn it, right?
He
Job was
don't.
righteous, but God calls him out for eventually breaking to the devil's temptations on him. And yet God still rewards him with twice the wealth. And you might be tempted to say, well, yeah, it might have been twice the wealth for some ancient, pobrecito, a little poor boy out in the Middle East. But these, you don't understand. Job was no Jeff Bezos. Job didn't have billions of dollars that he could spend on whatever he wanted. He just had, twice the hut, pittance to what we have. Well, as you heard him say, Job was given 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys, not to mention children. All of those things, first of all, very valuable and way more than you need personally. Clearly, a single person or a single family even does not need 14,000 sheep. This is well and above what was considered enough. 14,000 sheep, I don't know the going rate for sheep, but it's $300, $400 a head is like, we're talking millions of dollars, right? Tens of millions of dollars, maybe more, especially given like the things you could buy back then with these kinds of things. So even in today's money, this is an absurd amount of wealth given by God to Job.
You're right. He would not have been Jeff Bezos back then. He would have been Elon Musk back then. I'm exaggerating. I'm embellishing.
Okay, he's very rich man. And so is Abraham and a lot of other righteous patriarchs. God was gifting wealth to the righteous and obscene amounts of wealth, you might say. Those who are inclined to say that wealth is in and of itself a bad thing. There's obscene amounts of wealth given by God. And Jesus is God. Clearly, his comment about the wealthy being difficult to get into heaven isn't meaning that we should eschew all wealth. It's just that wealth is an obstacle. And I think we'd all agree that wealth is an obstacle. That's why it's given to the righteous as a reward. It's not given in advance of them being righteous.
Mm-hmm. When God says that the love of money is the roots of all kinds of evils, it's not money itself is the problem. It's the temptation that arises from what evil you want to do with the money.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, rich people have a lot of temptations. That's I hope you see the problem there.
But Sebastian, that was Old Testament.
Okay.
God is so much softer now with Jesus. He would never support the rich.
From Acts 16, one of those listening to Paul was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. The Apostle Paul went into the mansion of a purple trader. You would say, okay, trading purple, that's lame, that's cloth making. Who would be wealthy from that? That was the most lucrative business that you could go into. Maybe trading with India, spices, maybe that would rival it.
Gold mines, but yes, up there.
Yeah. Yes, outside of being a mint for the state, this, as an individual, this would have been the most lucrative business you could go into. And it was hard, but very lucrative. I remember reading a study on this in how some archaeologists compared what purple cloth was going for in that region and estimated the wealth that she would have accumulated or how many people her workshop would have had.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, that's too much work. She would have been a very rich business owner. And
Enough
God,
that her house could host the church as well.
Yeah. That's a very large house for standards at the time, by the way. If that's not clear. It would have been probably a mansion. And she is not scolded for having a mansion. Likewise, what's his face? In the letter to Philemon.
Mm-hmm. Wealthy man.
Yeah.
Slave owner.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, not chided for wealth.
Yeah, so again, if you missed it, the point is not that money, wealth is evil. It is the desires of the heart that arise from loving or pursuing, seeking, chasing after wealth and power that are evil.
Yeah. And I think, don't get me wrong, the wealthiest men in the United States right now are not Christian. I don't think they even profess to be. And so there's no confusion about that. And I don't think that, I do believe that God is rewarding the righteous. And I also believe that the unrighteous, their wealth is being stored up for the righteous. And because I believe that, and I would say the evidence also evidences it. So if you want to look at the stats, I would say like the wealth of great wicked men in the past has been dispersed to us. Like I and this whole nation have greatly benefited from the tireless, emphatic, obsessive work of wicked men like Rockefeller. Rockefeller created the Standard Oil in the United States. It's one of the biggest industries in the United States. Tons of companies have spawned from it. I benefit every week from being able to fill up at a gas station because of the tireless work of Rockefeller. And guess what? He's dead. I don't think that he was, maybe he was. I don't know that much about him, but if he wasn't Christian, he's dead. His inheritors are scattered. Like there are some rich Rockefellers, but frankly, the inheritance has been pretty scattered. And I benefit every day from being able to fill up from oil. I benefit from high wages here in the U.S. because oil is cheap and also has big businesses that pay their workers who then go and buy things from my companies that I work for. His wealth was indeed stored up for the righteous, and those who do good work, that's who ends up benefiting in the economy. That's where his wealth has gone. And so I believe God at his word. And so, yes, Jeff Bezos may have wealth today, and I don't think he's righteous. But he's here today and gone tomorrow, as Scripture promises, and his wealth is stored up for the righteous. I have no doubt that his wealth has already been distributed and will continue to be distributed to the righteous, ultimately. So, yes, I recognize that there are rich people in the United States, and the vast majority of them are wicked. I would say the majority of people in the United States are wicked, and so that's not surprising. But there are many righteous in the United States, and we benefit from God's patience and mercy and his essentially enslaving of the unrighteous for the sake of our benefit. Like that's the way I see my employers, I guess offense to my employers and maybe you at home working or you, Sebastian, is that as much as we work for them, the way the US is set up and the way God, I think, designs economies is that they work for us too. They bear all the risk. They bear the insurance costs. I think of it especially when there's like late night and things are broken at some client and it's it's the middle of the night and somebody's calling you. I'm not usually the call guy. I'm not the guy that gets the midnight call that something is broken to come fix it. But somebody does. Especially, like eventually it escalates to the owner of companies, somebody being paid more than me. And those guys are working the 50-hour, 60-hour, 70-hour weeks. And I'm glad they gain wealth from that. But they're paying me. Like essentially in that way, they are serving me. They're taking those very hard things. They're taking the big risks, the long nights, the sleepless nights, the stress. I'm glad they're rewarded for it. But they're also benefiting me. They work for me in that way. They work for me. They bear all these things so that I don't have to, which I greatly appreciate. So in that way, we're like serving each other. I serve them. They serve me. Their wealth is being distributed to me. Thanks, guys. In that way, I'm perfectly happy with these arrangements. I think it is the way God designed it.
Indeed. And truly, that fact often gets forgotten by advocates of corporatism or Marxism, that people who start businesses, they need a lot of resources, even if they are Nepo babies. The money comes from somewhere. And then that gets invested to establish a business, hire people, get the ball rolling. And that takes time. That takes in most cases, skill. And that's often gets forgotten. So wanting to steal all that work from people, whether they're righteous or unrighteous, clashes with the law of God, as we've gone over and over before in the previous episodes. So that fact often gets forgotten. You're right.
And if there is real stealing, and this is where capitalism, it kind of hand waves these problems, but that's because it's really only a portion of God's law. And so, of course, it hand waves it because the whole of God's law would address these things if it was actually God's law instead of Adam Smith's like kind of miniature version of it. But stealing, murder, all the things that would disrupt the market, unfair weights and balances, like all these things that are crimes, the state should punish as God commands in the law. God's law is pretty short, all things considered, way shorter than any of our nation's laws. Our nation's laws are like pages upon pages. I can't think of, there is no nation with anywhere remotely close to the brevity that God has had in his law. But his law has laws. So as brief as it is, it has laws on stealing, on murder, on equal weights and measures. And so if you steal from somebody, this is Exodus 22, but it's a lot of laws about stealing in the Bible. Anyone who steals must certainly make restitution. But if they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for their theft. Hence how you become a slave. And then eventually, if you remember the law that Sebastian read out, even if the way you become a slave is through unrighteous living, somehow, whether you stole something and need to pay for it, or you were so in debt you needed to sell yourself into slavery. But even that slave, after 6 years of service, in the 7th year, he was released and given a huge gift so that he can go and not be destitute after his slavery. So what a wonderful system. But anyways, anyone who steals must certainly make restitution. If they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for their theft. If the stolen animal is found alive in their, or animal thing, insert what this is being used as case law for, is found alive and in their possession, whether ox or donkey or sheep, they must pay back a double. But there's switching laws here. It's a little above, but whoever steals an ox or sheep and sells it or slaughters it must pay back 5 for the thing they sold, or 4. So up to the judge's discretion on how much they pay back. But in any case, the punishment for stealing is paying double as opposed to jail. I don't know to go down this rabbit hole, but these are the way that God provisions for the government to punish unrighteousness, the things that might pervert the market. And it's more than the market. It's God's rewarding of righteousness and injustice. So the government is part of that, and the market, God's hand, is part of it as well. That's why I would strongly advocate not for capitalism, but for theonomy. Just push for God's law or the implementation of God's law in your nation as close as we can get.
This might be going too much off the cuff, but I was reminded of Deuteronomy 22 when King James, oh my gosh, when thou buildest a new house, then thou shalt make a parapet for thy roof, that thou bring not blood upon thy house, if any man fall from thence. Some might say, oh, look at savage capitalism in the late 1800s, in which children were being thrown into factories, machines were just flying everywhere, and workers were, yep, suck it up, just work in there. The problem is, I would apply the precepts of this law,
Yes.
providing a safe work environment, is already addressed in God's law. The fact that was happening in the factory means that either somebody bribed the government, that's a perversion of justice. And God's law addresses that. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, and to be sidetracked by history, but the reason we know about like abuses in factories is because they sued, just like they do today. Those people sued the crap out of factory owners, and they may have been poor. They found lawyers, like countryside lawyers, big deal. Just like there's insurance guys in Minnesota where we live, and I'm sure wherever your home state is, because they're a big deal. Injury insurance lawyers everywhere, and they were in the 1700s and the 1800s. Like money's always been the same. They have always been high litigators, and so yes, some bad factories had dangerous working conditions, and they got punished for it. Not only did they lose the worker, but they also lost the ability for that worker to work. They also got sued, and I tell you, they got sued a lot. And so it did not take Teddy Roosevelt or any government intervention to do this, although the government should be punishing wrongdoing. It didn't take regulation, I should say. It took punishment, took lawyers winning cases. And so with the parapet law, I think we get a little carried away determining what parapet means in the modern context of like, oh, you have to have all the safety equipment before we even let you operate. Well, no, but if you don't have a parapet, in fact, the law says this, if you don't have a parapet, i.e. we did not punish you, like you were allowed to not have a roof with a parapet on it. If you didn't have a parapet and then somebody was up there and then they fell, you are punished for manslaughter. Just like if you have a murderous, wild, violent animal and then they get out and they gore somebody, you will be held liable because you knew this thing was dangerous and then you let it happen. You weren't not allowed to have a violent animal. You were not allowed to have a violent animal and let it go do something bad. And so in this way, we punish the after the fact, not before the fact. That's the way God's law works. So I would advocate for that. But yes, it's looking out for your neighbor. Like a righteous factory worker or owner builds safe work environments so that he doesn't end up with somebody who loses a hand or their livelihood, because the cost that God's law would demand for somebody losing their livelihood is really high, probably higher than whatever safety system was required to fence off the machine that was dangerous. And lest, I guess, our anarcho-capitalist people be anti the government for all the reasons, because they think government cannot be trusted. God does give the government the right to wield the sword. Same famous passages from Romans, but Romans 13, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear from one in authority? Then do what is right, and you'll be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for the rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, who give their full time for governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. There's so many things to talk about on this one. We've talked about it before. Yes, it does not mean a blanket, always obey the authorities. I get it. But take it for what it does mean, and that is that, and the ideal, and the way God is like working the norm, is that the government does exist for a reason, and it does punishment, it does bear the sword, and it does correct unrighteousness. It rewards righteousness. So in general, even in wicked countries, righteousness is rewarded in general, and there ought to be blaring exceptions. There will be blaring exceptions because government is not perfect, and so in those cases, use discernment and whether or not you obey the government. But in general, this is how the government works. And so, yeah, this is part of theonomy that is absent in capitalism, and it's just missing because capitalism is just a straight pull from God's law and missed, the extras, the good stuff, the things that make it run an actual society. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a long episode here, but I would just reiterate, yes, a Christian can be capitalist. No, a capitalist does not need to be Christian. And a Christian, consistent Christian, should be more than capitalist, should be capitalist and obey all of God's law and trust God's law. Capitalism is really just like a piece of theology. It's just a portion of what God is and what he's promised. So believe more than capitalism. But yes, I'm not offended by capitalism. I detest, I'll say, I do an episode like this, caveat, I hesitate to criticize capitalism as being like not enough, because as soon as somebody hears that, all the complaints against capitalism are not usually that, oh, how I wish more of God's law was implemented. Almost never is that somebody complaining about capitalism, like, oh, how I wish more of God was being believed. Almost always it's like, there's a problem with capitalism. It's that I don't have enough money. If only there were mandatory safety regulations at my local factory, to take a pretty benign thing. Let alone, like, if only we banned rich people, or they took all their money and gave it to me, or everybody should get free houses. Or the thing with capitalism is people, get too wealthy. There's too many women out there, right? I don't know. I'm thinking of crazy, clearly wrong things that they complain about capitalism. It wasn't capitalism that did that. It's either like just the regular old wickedness of men, or the one suggesting it, you're wicked. Like your suggestion is terrible. So I'm remiss to criticize it, only because the critics out there are almost always wrong. But it has a big law-shaped hole in it because it doesn't have the whole of the law. So just take the whole of the law. That's my suggestion for capitalists. Take it all then. Don't just take part of the law, take the whole thing.
Yes, if you want to advocate for stealing someone's property, just advocate for stealing someone's property. Don't hide behind strange definitions.
Yeah. We had a long, I know it's already long, but you're in it for the long haul. I guess you're listening right now. We had a long discussion before we started recording, Sebastian, on like when business practices are unrighteous. And I think it's difficult for Christians and anyone else to determine, like, when should the government intervene with the sword to correct a business for like malfeasance or malpractice against its employees? And is it obviously unrighteous when some big corporation is laying off a ton of its workforce? Like, can we definitively say that the executives of that company are greedy or whatever? Like, that's where I guess there's nuance. I was discussing with you, maybe naively, I so strongly believe in God's hand in the market. And I am pretty convinced that the government is usually not intervening in these things. So if like a local big organization, for example, that we live near 3M here in Minnesota, they lay off people, as does every business. I believe that 3M has lasted for a long time. And yeah, they're going to make mistakes like any other company does. But when they're driving towards maximizing their stock price, the way that God has set up stock in the US essentially is that stock is the value that people find from 3M. And so if they're driving toward that, even if they are only looking to enrich themselves, because they're serving others via the stock price, via the things that their business is doing for people, they are driving for a more and more righteous business. And when they fire people, I generally think that, eventually they're going to do the right thing. And if they don't, they'll cease to be a business. But like, because they have a pretty good track record of like sticking around for a while, and their stock price has a decent track record of sticking around for a while, I tend to trust like the overall long-term vision of some of these businesses, because if they are driving towards like increasing their stock price, because that's the way God has set up the economy, is that is that will reward righteousness. And so that's my general opinion on like companies who are laying off or hiring, is that we don't ever complain when companies are hiring a lot, but like it's the same potentially bad thing in that they're hiring too many employees or they're firing too many employees, right? Like, yes, there's some line of which you're probably hiring too many or firing too many, but I I don't think it necessarily speaks to corporate greed when companies are trying to figure out what the most efficient way is to bring value. But I could be wrong.
I leave it as a matter of the heart. If you have the opportunity to sit with one of these people that make those decisions, well, first of all, come to Christ, number one. That aside, are you truly seeking what is best for the business, the people that are part of this business, and the community as a whole? Best seeking, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And if you answer yes, okay, your conscience is clean before God. Do what you think you must do in this limited life that we have. But if in your heart, you know that you're actually just trying to make a quick buck and then get out, then I would urge you to repentance and evaluate your heart.
Yeah, and do well by your employer. Like usually when you're looking to make a quick buck and get out, it's at the expense of your employer as well as potentially people underneath you. And so I think it's righteous to consider both, to be serving everyone to the maximum that you can. It is just business at the end of the day. And so you do have to make some hard decisions as far as quitting or firing people or whatever. I also think, I don't know, a danger, just like when people criticize capitalism, in that they're probably criticizing it for the wrong reasons. I also think a danger in considering the community or whatever, like considering the holistic thing, is that often you, instead of trusting that God rewards the righteous and doesn't reward the unrighteous, and therefore like getting richer is probably the more righteous thing to do, you might think, well, we could increase revenue, the things that people are paying us for, the things that make 3M or whatever organization you are a righteous place. We could increase revenue by 100%, or we can increase it by 50% and then send a bunch of profits to Ghana or to my favorite charity. Okay, you could do that, and you might think, well, now I'm benefiting the community.
Which community?
Maybe you aren't.
Yeah.
Like how much thought have you put into which charity you're going to give money to, and like do you know them very well? Because you're not really paying, like their connection to the money that they're getting is not so connected to the market. They're basically not connected to the market. They're kind of connected to the market, and that like you think of them as a good charity, so they're like a very reputation-based thing. They're trading reputation for you. But notoriously, nonprofits do not spend money well, even if they're well-meaning, let alone like an evil-run charity is definitely not spending money well. And so, was that actually the good thing to do with your wealth? It's probably a bad investment, I would say, because you're disconnected from the feedback that would tell you whether or not it was a good investment. And so I would promote, this is very Milton Friedman, who's not a Christian, so I could be corrected, but Milton Friedman's an economist, Chicagoan in the US, and he would say that it really is the corporation's like imperative, prerogative, and purpose to drive the maximum revenue and value for its shareholders, and that their shareholders can then determine what they do with the money that they make. But like the business really should just be driving to do what it does best, because that's what everybody has agreed that it should do. Every stockholder and employee and fellow employers, they made 3M to go make whatever 3M does a billion things, but to make the revenue that it makes, not to pay for a local charity. And so like if you want to, do it with your own money. Why are you doing it with like the collective 3M's money? So I would caution that, like, thinking holistically, there's a word for it. I'm already forgetting, but like social something. It's like some buzzword for corporations to like give money to charities. I'd be very skeptical of that, frankly. Give money on your own to charities, but using the corporate's profits, I don't think is a good idea generally. Yeah. So maybe that's very like callous of me, but I don't think, like, to me it's not callous, because I'm thinking I trust God's word that the wealth, like if we're doing righteous things, the wealth is good. Like this is what's generating good for the people that we're serving with our services, the business. And so let's keep driving towards things that make the most money. Yeah. Which I think is very simple and like directly measurable way of determining whether or not you're in line with God's will or not are we making money or not? Because there's a lot of ways to deceive yourself into thinking that you are in God's will. when you're not, or you're like not the most efficient. But money is like a very tangible way of saying, am I in God's will or not? I guess there's like a million caveats to that, because not every way of making money is godly. As God's law would tell you that thieving is a way to make money and it is unrighteous, and prostituting is a way to make money and it's unrighteous, and aborting babies is a way to make money and it's unrighteous. So yes, there's all these things, but if you're making money like in a righteous way, then yeah, keep doing it. Usury, I mean, there's like 100 things to talk about as far as God's law and like money, and there's usury, and people complain about usury. I think there's places for usury, as the Bible would prescribe to, using usury, that is interest-bearing loans on foreign nations. And there's lots of foreign nations that deal with the U.S. I think usury has its place, but charging countrymen usury is forbidden in the Bible, and I would agree with that, actually. I think we shouldn't charge usury. There's like nuances, like the way Muslims also ban usury, and the way they do it is basically charging usury, but not make it interest. It's like, if you make money, we make money. Like a portion of it, it's like profit sharing, which I think that's allowed by God's law. Interest is like, whether you lose money or you gain money, you owe me my 5%, right? And that's what's evil about it, is it like indebts people who essentially go bankrupt, or like the business venture they were going on doesn't work out. But profit sharing is like, I lose money, the lender loses money if you lose money, and the lender gains money if you gain money. So I feel like that's the way to do usury, which is, people really freak out when you suggest removing interest from the United States, because they think that like no bank can ever give a loan. No, banks can still give loans. They'll just do it in a profit sharing way, which is slightly less profitable for the bank. But it's better for society as a whole. And you know what? It's because it's in, I say that because I know it, because it's in God's law. So I'm sure we could find some sociological study that would tell us this, but I trust it because it's in God's law. That's why I would advocate for no interest loans, but like profit sharing loans.
So, in conclusion, we have looked at very popular political, economic systems that are making the rounds in the world today. People love or hate them. And we have tried to examine them with scripture, how consistent these systems are with the precepts and teachings of Yahweh in Old and New Testament. And I would contend, let the viewer decide, that the one who is the system that is least clashing, or at best in harmony with the teachings, the precepts of the law of God, is what was proposed by Adam Smith. The observations, as Michael would say, the discovery. I call it revolutionary. Michael calls it discovery. Same difference.
Well, it's old hat. Look, Moses already gave it.
Yeah, that, whatever you want to call it, capitalism, is the least harmful, because it doesn't override, it doesn't clash, it doesn't go against God's law. Whereas Marxism, from the get-go, just clashes with laws that God has provided, Old and New Testament, as well as fascism and corporatism.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard my complaint. My only complaint with capitalism is that it gets too much attention. Like, really, capitalism is good because God's law is good. And so we should be pushing towards God's law and get rid of this middle stage. Capitalism is like a half implementation, a quarter implementation of God's law. Let's do the whole thing. And so that's my complaint with capitalism, is like, it's a safe way for God haters to say they love God's law, because they don't have to love it all. They just love this part of it. And for that, I don't like Adam Smith. For that, I say Adam Smith has divorced God's law from legislation, in a way.
Oh, so silly of me, and you too. Legislation from Old Testament rules that God gave to government. What would you say are its chief objectives? The purpose of government? Justice.
Yep, justice.
Military, perhaps.
I suppose.
And anything else?
Promoting righteousness? I don't know.
Yes, yeah. I'm just trying to point out that it has a very limited prescription of what a government can or should do. That's what I was saying. Sorry to put you in the spot. That's what I was trying to get at. Whereas Marxism and fascism, corporatism, is it the state needs to do all these million wonderful different things, which are not part of what government envisioned by God should be. That's all I was trying to say. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Yeah, I mean, we're so
Yes, I know.
so late.
I know.
I could keep going. I think. So I will keep going. I think I don't know what God's government exactly will be like. I assume it will follow His law. Maybe there'll be more. Maybe there'll be different things. I don't know. He is the authority. But when He runs the government, at some point in the future, whether that's in heaven or the interim between heaven and His when He returns. I mean, this is according to your eschatology, so bear with me here. But whenever God runs things, whenever that happens, if there are wicked who are watching, whether it's from hell or on earth, I guarantee they won't only complain that God is doing too much. I think we think of sinners as going like, oh no, you're punishing me for greed and gluttony and lust and whatever else. But they also demand things from God that He's not doing enough of. I think that's like the sin from the Garden of Eden. Wasn't that God was punishing them for things. It was the God that wasn't giving them enough. Oh, I want that fruit too. That's what they wanted. And so in the same way, I think that one of the things people hate about God's law is not just that it keeps them from doing things that they want to do, sure, but it's also that it doesn't do enough. And I highly suspect, based on how limited God's law is, and if that's the way God runs His government when He runs it here, if there's any complainers, again, depending on your eschatology, if there's any complainers out there to be had, they may complain, well, you're not doing enough. Like God's law isn't sending people to jail for stealing. It's charging them money. Like that is not enough. The thief deserves death. The thief deserves enslavement. The thief deserves whatever. And God says no. Like an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. It's not a tooth for a life. We don't escalate like that. And if you look at law codes that aren't God's law, like the law code of Hammurabi, in some ways it's similar. In other ways, it doesn't adhere to the principle of eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It says like tooth for life. And in Islam, similar law code will say, you thieve, you lose your hands, you lose your means of production, you lose your whole livelihood because you stole. That's not eye for eye. That's eye for life. You took my eye, I'm going to take your life. You stole my things, I'm going to take your life. I'm going to take your livelihood. You're enslaved forever. And you're not a useful slave either. And so that is a hidden tendency, I think, of sinners, is to demand the government, God, do more. And God's law does enough. 600 plus commandments is enough. And if you want it to do more, I would check your heart, because you're probably on the side of sinners that say that God should do more than He is. And evidenced by the world around us, God is pretty laissez-faire, hands off, to use the economic term. He is not actively, visibly changing hearts and minds and nations and moving around and commanding things from the sky like that. Whether you think He should or not, or that He will, He's not doing it right now. So clearly God loves operating, at least for now, like this, hands pretty off. And so in the same way, I think that's how He'll run His government, because He's running it right now. That's how He's running things, pretty hands off. Obviously, He's intimate in every piece of life, and He's written this whole story, and there's not a particle in the universe outside of His sovereignty, but the way He's operating in His sovereignty is very laissez-faire. And so I think that's how we should operate in life too, after the example of our Father. All right. That's why we serve the Lord Jesus Christ. Found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. I've been Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right, your left has been
Sebastian, the archivist.
Thank you for listening. If you want to see the rest of our episodes, you got to go to Found Cause. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple, whatever it's called, Apple Podcasts. They keep changing the name on me every couple years. I'm just too old. We'll talk on something completely different next week. Maybe even a reaction video. We haven't done one of those in a while. Thank you for bearing with us in a very long episode and a very long series. We'd love to hear your comments. Sebastian, I think you already said your outro. Any last words of wisdom before we go?
Ultimately, the best system of government in the whole world is God's. So submit to it.
Submit to it. Amen. I look forward to it. Bye.
Bye.